Well, let's move on to the guy who is currently wide receiver 7 by rookie ADP, and that is Lad McConkey, 6 foot tall, even on the nose, 186 pounds. Ran a borderline 4.39, I think. But the thing that everyone remembers from the combine is the absolutely flawless gauntlet, where he's just like, oh, wow. And he did test better than I expected. But again, you talk about production profile, never more than 800 yards in a season, never more than 7 touchdowns in a season. So at wide receiver 7 before the draft, is that too high, too low, or just right for you, and why?
Yeah, I'm really, really interested to see how things are going to play out for McConkey. So he was somebody I was really intrigued to look into his data because some of the guys that I trust have thrown out some lofty comparisons. Like I've heard Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson used as comparisons for him. Even Tyler Lockett from Matt Harmon.
Yep.
And I guess I could see Lockett like early career where he's mostly working from this slot, but what I found with McConkey that bothered me was he really, really struggled against press coverage. And that's what Matt's grades bared out as well. I am worried that he might get pigeonholed into like only a slot type of role, which he could still be productive from. But like people have been, talking about his ability to win down the field, and that I think that shows up on film when you watch him. But some of the underlying data just really isn't that great. So he wasn't very good against man coverage either. He was much, much better against zone. And typically you want a receiver that you're going to be drafting in the first few rounds to be able to dominate man coverage at the collegiate level. And so it does bother me a little bit when something like that pops up. And then really his production profile isn't that great, partially because of injuries. But then even when you do parse it down to the per route data, he really just had one season where he had good per route data. That was his final season, and that came on a really small sample size. Outside of that, he really wasn't very productive, even on a per route basis. So I think McConkey is interesting. I think he has the tools, and people really, really love his quickness and just the crispness that he runs his routes with. And so this stuff might not matter. He was competing with Brock Bowers for targets, and he was just asked to line up on the outside and do the big boy stuff. And so like that could have definitely impacted his production. So I think it's going to be like we're going to say with a lot of these guys, it's going to be contingent on where he lands. But if he gets a high draft pick, like the tools are there.
But he is not a top 7 wide receiver for you right now in this class. Is that right?
He's right there on the borderline. The way I see
Okay.
Lad McConkey is more like Sterling Shepard, like best case outcome, something like that, or potentially more like a Devin Duvernay kind of player. So yeah, I'm not quite as excited about him as a lot of people are.
Yeah, I think the comp I saw over on Player Profiler was Percy Harvin. What I was going to say is I think people are going to see him and see that he's strictly a short area PPR specialist out of the slot because of the picture. He did have quite a few big plays though, right? Like this guy has some ability to do things after the catch as well. There's an athletic profile here.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. And is it like most of his catches were explosive, honestly. Like that's what Georgia was asking him to do, and he did it pretty well. But I do worry a little bit about his data against slot or against press and man coverage and like how that will translate to the NFL level. Is he going to be able to run those types of routes at the NFL level and win? I would guess no, which might leave him as mostly just a slot threat. But yeah, he can create after the catch for sure.
Good stuff. So what do you think in terms of the safer profile? Would you say that he has a safer profile than Mitchell does, but maybe not quite as much upside?
Yeah, I have him definitively ahead of Mitchell. He falls in the same range as like Leggett and Xavier Worthy and Roman Wilson, Jermaine Burton. I think he's ahead of Wilson and Burton.
And then do you think that McConkey has the upside to be a legitimate top 24 dynasty wide receiver at any point in his career?
I think so. I think if he's in the perfect role, he could like the Elijah Moore role his rookie year, like that kind of player, like where he really is dynamic from the slot, and you can move him around, and he could probably win from the flanker as well. What I've seen suggests that he's probably, that's the extent. He's not going to be like a true wide receiver 1, which is why I back off of the Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson comparisons a little bit. But yeah, I think top 24 is feasible.
And that is interesting because like we've seen Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson function as the true wide receiver ones on their team. And we've ranked them as top 12 dynasty wide receivers just without hesitation. But in terms of actual fantasy production early in their career, they've really been more low end number 2 type or even number 3s in some years because of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying, so when you say number 1, you mean he doesn't have the potential to be a fantasy wide receiver 1 or an NFL wide receiver 1 from McConkey?
Right. Yeah. I'm potentially a fantasy wide receiver 1 if it's an ideal spot.
Right.
But yeah, I was talking about real life wide receiver 1.